University of Calgary, located here in southern Alberta, both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which include the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation within Alberta, and that's Nose Hill Métis District 5 and Elbow Métis District 6. My name is Bill Galley, and I'm the Vice President Research here at the University of Calgary, and I'm delighted to be the MC for this evening's event, Blue Peace and Beyond, Transboundary Water Diplomacy for a Secure World. I'm actually very pleased to be doing this event because I'm also Swiss. Ma maman est lausannoise, comme certains ici. Et c'est avec plaisir que je suis ici comme MC de l'événement. I have a deep appreciation of the country of Switzerland, not only because of my personal connections, but also because of many connections that we are developing with Switzerland in domains that include responsible innovation, sustainable water governance, and international cooperation. The University of Calgary is a close partner of the Consulate General of Switzerland in Vancouver, which we value very much and are grateful for the opportunities we've created together. We have a deep academic and research partnership with Swiss organizations, and this includes many of the international organizations in Switzerland, but also some entities from Switzerland. So, for example, the University of Calgary has substantial connections to the World Health Organization, where we have 3 different collaborating centers designated. One is in the domain of classifications and health information, a second is in the domain of AMR One Health, and a third is in the domain of chronic disease, specifically focusing on kidney disease. We also have partnerships with CERN that is, of course, based in Geneva, where we have a team of physicists working in subatomic physics and also antimatter. So if you've seen the movie Angels and Demons or read the book, you can go there, and there are eyeball scanners at CERN. I can attest to that, having visited. We have a partnership with Chi Ventures, which is a Swiss organization dedicated to advancing global quantum technology innovation and AI technologies. And we have a number of collaborations with multiple Swiss universities, over 1,000 publications in the very recent past from many colleagues here at the University of Calgary, collaborating with many in Switzerland. And these partnerships are doing nothing but deepening and broadening as we have a shared commitment to expanding our collaborations with Switzerland. Today's event is an exciting one because it brings together Swiss and Canadian experts, policymakers, and academics to discuss how transboundary water management can foster peace, resilience, and sustainability in an increasingly water-stressed world. This is on the backdrop of us talking a lot about science diplomacy and ourselves being engaged with the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, which is an entity, an organization that we'll hopefully have a chance to hear more about over the course of today's event. We're really honored to be co-hosting this event with the Consulate General of Switzerland in Vancouver, and I'd like to acknowledge several distinguished guests and representatives who are with us this evening. We have our president, Dr. Ed McCauley, president and vice-chancellor of the University of Calgary here at the front left. We have Mr. Thomas Schneider, welcome Thomas, Consul General of Switzerland in Vancouver. We have our colleague Pam Farrell, who's the honorary consul for Switzerland here in Calgary and a professor at the Workland School of Education. And we have some members of the Calgary Consular Corps, and this is always a little bit dangerous because I have what speaking notes say, and sometimes winter roads or busy days. Some people may not be here, but the Consul General of Mexico in Calgary, perhaps raise your hands if you're here, your hand. Nope, okay. And then the honorary consul for Finland, I did see Judith, yeah, here you are in the front. Germany, Norway, Mongolia, and Côte d'Ivoire. So some are here. I'd like to welcome Ms. Sybille Vermont, who's here in the front left. She's Deputy Head of Section Global Affairs in the International Affairs Division of the Federal Office for the Environment in Bern. And we have a researcher visiting us, Dr. Christian Bréthaut, front left here, who's Associate Professor in Water Governance at the University of Geneva. We're very grateful that both Ms. Vermont and Dr. Bréthaut have flown in from Switzerland to join us today. We also have some representatives from both the Government of Canada and Government of Alberta here, as well as colleagues from nonprofit organizations and industry. Thank you all for joining us. Over the course of this evening, we'll hear from the Consul General of Switzerland in Vancouver and from President McCauley. Their remarks are going to be followed by a fireside chat where we'll have the opportunity to hear from Swiss and Canadian experts on the opportunities and challenges associated with water security and water diplomacy. And then we'll wrap up with remarks from the Consul General and from Buffy Santamond, our Senior Director for UC International. This will be followed by a networking reception and an opportunity to explore the Blue Peace exhibition, which showcases perspectives from both Switzerland and the University of Calgary. And these panels are going to remain on display here for the next 2 weeks. So you will have an opportunity to engage with them today, but you can also encourage people to come and see them later. It's now my pleasure to invite our President and Vice-Chancellor Ed McCauley to deliver opening remarks. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Bill, and it's great for everyone to join us this evening. Chris Mild is here. Chris, who gives away our Norway consul, is here. And there are many leaders in this room in the water area, from both government, universities, as well as the not-for-profit sector. But I do want to give a major shout out to Kim Sturgis, who is with us tonight. Kim, as you know, is one of Canada's star engineers. She also was a former CEO of WaterSmart, but also has led in the province of Alberta discussions about water, very, very important discussions about water. And Alberta would not be the province it is without Kim's leadership. So thank you, Kim. So again, good evening, everyone. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the University of Calgary and tonight's event, Blue Peace and Beyond, the Transboundary Water Diplomacy for a Secure World, which is co-hosted by the University of Calgary and the Consulate General of Switzerland in Vancouver. I think everybody here knows that we are at a remarkable moment in which our collective responsibility is unmistakable, because water, in all of its forms, is one of the defining global challenges of our time. Crossing borders, generations, and often the lines that too often divide us. One challenge, of course, is the quantity of water. Sometimes there's not enough. Some places get too much, too quickly. Another challenge is the quality of the water, which changes dramatically in terms of the way in which humans and animals interact with it. And climate change, of course, crosses both of those qualities and threatens to exacerbate the challenges that we face on dealing with water quantity and water quality. So it really is up to us. And as scholars, as diplomats, policymakers, students, researchers, industry partners, to shape policies informed by science and the product of dialogue. And that's why water diplomacy is just so important, because how we manage water resources affects our environment, our health, as well as our economies. And some of the specific challenges may differ. Here in Alberta, it's often water scarcity, water allocation, but the solutions invariably are found through science as well as negotiations. And we at the University of Calgary believe that universities cannot be bystanders. We are the anchor points, the innovators, the conveners of dialogue, and the bridges between science and diplomacy, which we hope you will see demonstrated tonight. For me, this collaboration with Switzerland is particularly meaningful. We've built very strong relationships over the years, co-hosting the Swiss Innovation Fest last year, welcoming visiting researchers and engaging in bilateral academic exchange. Many of us have visited Switzerland, a country whose leadership in water diplomacy, science, and sustainability is inspiring, as well as a model for how academia and industry and government could interact to better economic prosperity and quality of life. Water is also kind of important to me. It's been in essence, my academic career in dealing with water issues. I've worked on theory and experiments to understand the dynamics of aquatic ecosystems, and then to apply this knowledge to reduce, for example, the probability of algal blooms in lakes, to reduce taste and odor events in drinking water reservoirs, or to improve the wastewater treatment for safe water discharge into river systems. 47 years ago, I published my first paper on dynamics of aquatic ecosystems. I was an undergraduate. It happened to be in Nature. I had no idea what Nature was, the journal Nature, in terms of, anyway, the importance of it. But it was on cybernetic mechanisms to understand how you can reduce the probability of noxious algae occurring in lakes. Nobody here has read that paper. Maybe there's 2 or 3 people in the room. I know, because I forced it on them. Anyway, but it's really, really important to me, the water piece, especially for the province of Alberta. With my colleagues, and many of them in the room here, we built AQUA, Advanced Canadian Wastewater Assets, the incredible science piece that's embedded in the cutting-edge tertiary wastewater treatment plant. And we can do experiments there that can't be done anywhere else in the world. We also formed the first tri-university center in the province of Alberta with the University of Alberta, the University of Calgary, and the University of Lethbridge. And again, several of my colleagues that helped build that are actually in the room. So this is a very, very important topic for me, near and dear to my heart, and so I'll continue with my speaking notes prepared. So as I mentioned, as a university, we're on a clear water journey in terms of our contributions. We're proud to host the world's first United Nations University Hub focused on water. One we developed in partnership with the UNU Institute for Water, Environment and Health, led by Dr. Martin Clark and Dr. Carrie Black, who you hear about, and Martin is here also a little bit later. So this hub actually empowers communities to adapt to environmental change by combining science policy relevant solutions as well as workforce development. It brings together 4 research clusters: aquatic ecosystems, the risk of infectious diseases as water climate changes, environmental prediction for water sustainability, and resilience in Indigenous communities. In other words, we're just not studying water. We're studying people, infrastructure, ecosystems, treaties, and governance. And there's more. Early this year, the University of Calgary hosted XPRIZE, Water Scarcity Track A-Team Summit. It's part of the $119 million XPRIZE Water Scarcity Competition, the largest prize purse in XPRIZE history, sponsored by the Mohammed bin Zayed Water Initiative. It was an extraordinary moment that brought together global innovators, engineers, and scientists, including many of the partners represented here tonight, diplomats, policymakers, Swiss colleagues, Canadian scholars, and students, as well as industry leaders. And we're all part of this essential conversation as to how we can secure water for our shared future. I think people know that XPRIZE established its first hub in the world outside of the XPRIZE in Canada, here in Calgary, and that conversation actually started in JESDA in Geneva. As we look ahead, I'm really excited to share an announcement made recently at the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, or what we refer to as JESDA. We at the University of Calgary are partnering with McGill University, Université de Montréal, JESDA, and the Swiss Consulate in Montreal on the first Canadian Science Diplomacy Summit will take place next June in Montreal. and they'll be bringing the JESDA Summit, the Diplomacy Summit, for the first time in Canada. So again, it's another one of these opportunities that I think are really, really important, that is built out of the collaboration, the tremendous collaboration with the Swiss Consulate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for leading us in all of those international partnerships that you just summarized. It's now my honor to invite Thomas Schneider to come up to the podium in a second. Just very briefly, Thomas has been the Consul General in Vancouver since 2023. He has had a number of diplomatic postings over the course of an exciting, it looks like, career of many stops that have included, and you can rate the places relative to Calgary and Vancouver. He's been in Barcelona, in Frankfurt, in Manila, in Paris. Paris isn't very nice. And then he was in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, Lagos, Nigeria, and then Vancouver. And Ed presented just before the session a gift to Thomas of a compass. And the idea of a compass was to give him something to look at as it rains day after day after day after day in Vancouver, to come to the sunshine of Calgary if you need some vitamin D. So we're so delighted to be hosting you here again, Thomas, and very excited to have you at the podium to say some words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill, for the introduction. You forgot actually New York. Yeah, that was. So, good evening, everyone. And as Bill said before, I was posted in Nigeria before I came here. And the Nigerians have a way of saying, before a speech, they say, I stand with established protocol, which means that I don't have to mention everyone that is here because Bill did already. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and an honor for us to be here again and to welcome you all tonight. First, I want, of course, to extend my deepest gratitude to our co-organizer and host, the University of Calgary, especially President Dr. Ed McCauley, Vice President Dr. Bill Cawley, and Ms. Kate Hamilton, who unfortunately cannot be here tonight, and the faculty and staff who have worked to make tonight's event a reality. The University of Calgary stands as one of Canada's leading institutions, tackling global challenges through research, education, and advocacy. Our Swiss Consulate General team in Vancouver wholeheartedly shares your commitment to fostering a global mindset and building bridges across borders and disciplines. The theme of this event tonight, Transboundary Water Cooperation for a Secure World, could not be more timely. We face a world in which international conflicts, population growth, pollution, and the accelerating impacts of climate change are placing immense strain on our freshwater resources. Actually, this afternoon, I was listening into a parliamentary session of the assembly in Edmonton, and funny enough, they were talking about water. You know, the water that the farmers need and so on, and the scarcity of it. So it's a really a very important topic everywhere. Water is not just an environmental issue. It is fundamentally linked to food security, energy production, human health, and critically to peace and security. In regions where rivers and lakes cross borders, competition for this vital resource can easily escalate into tension. Our shared objective must therefore be to actively transform water from a potential source of conflict into an instrument of cooperation and peace. This is the only way to ensure water security for all, not only for us, but for future generations. Switzerland, often called the water tower of Europe or the water castle of Europe, is the source of major European rivers such as the Rhine, the Rhone, and the Inn. Managing transboundary water resources is part of our history, and our contemporary identity. Over the years, we have built strong mechanisms of collaboration, and with that comes a special responsibility. This commitment is also reflected in Switzerland's international engagement. International Geneva hosts several key water organizations, including UN Water, the UN Economic Commission for Europe's Water Division, and the World Meteorological Organization's division dedicated to hydrology and water resources. It is also home to the Platform for International Water Law at the University of Geneva, the Water and Climate Coalition, and many others. The Geneva Water Hub, an institute working at the interface of science, diplomacy, and policy, is another important actor advancing global water governance. Together, these institutions make Geneva a global center for water expertise and cooperation. Drawing on this experience, Switzerland launched the Blue Peace Initiative in 2010. The core idea is to link high-level policy dialogue on water resources management with concrete action on the ground to bring together countries to share water resources. What does Blue Peace look like in practice? It uses various instruments to reduce tensions over shared water resources. Blue Peace currently operates in 3 priority regions: the Middle East, Central Asia, and West Africa. For instance, the initiative has supported the creation of transboundary water commissions to ensure shared decision-making, for example, on the Chu-Talas River basins shared by Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. It has helped develop shared data and early warning systems for floods and droughts, providing Tajikistan and Uzbekistan with common information base. It has assisted in designing water, energy, food security strategies in the Middle East, leading to joint infrastructure projects in Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and Iran. As a nation with a deep tradition of neutrality, Switzerland is widely recognized as a trusted and genuine partner. This neutrality allows us to act as an effective facilitator by creating safe spaces and bringing different parties to the table without pursuing our own geopolitical interests and focusing instead on the shared benefits of cooperation. Today's event is another valuable opportunity to exchange Canadian and Swiss perspectives, share best practices, and establish new pathways for water diplomacy. Thank you for joining us tonight, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Thomas, for giving us that context. We're now moving into the main discussion for tonight, and that's the Fireside Chat, again exploring the theme Blue Peace and Beyond, Transboundary Water Diplomacy for a Secure World. We will have President McCauley serving as the moderator for the event, and I'll just set the stage with introducing our 3 panelists. So first, visiting from Switzerland, we have Sibylle Vermont, and Sibylle is Deputy Head, as I said, of Section Global Affairs at the Federal Office for the Environment, and I guess it says you just finished your role there, but you will have a lot of perspectives from that. Thank you for being here on the panel. We also have Christian Bréthaut, and Christian is Associate Professor in Water Governance in the Department of Geography and Environment. He's also a member of the Institute for Environmental Sciences at the University of Geneva. Of relevance to today, he also serves as the Director of the Environmental Governance and Territorial Development Hub and Institute. He also co-leads a UNESCO chair on hydropolitics at the University of Geneva. And for the audience to know this, the University of Calgary also has a UNESCO chair relating to water in mountain water sustainability, and Fred Rona, and along with Carrie Black and others, were instrumental to securing that UNESCO chair here at the University of Calgary. And then last but not least, we have our University of Calgary colleague that we're very proud of, Dr. Carrie Black. Carrie is an associate professor and Canada Research Chair in the Schulich School of Engineering, and more specifically, Department of Civil Engineering. And for those of you who know Carrie, you know she's not very interesting to listen to. She's not a very good speaker. And I'm going to get away from the podium and let President McCauley bring the panel up.
So tonight, what's really obviously very, very important is that this diplomacy summit and gatherings like this actually remind us that science diplomacy is not an abstract idea. It's actually a living practice, and one that connects nations, builds trust, and fosters peace through shared understanding of our planet's most vital resource. And so I really look forward to engaging with the panel tonight on aspects of this. To begin with, what I'd like to do, Sibylle, maybe I could begin with you. Could you briefly describe your role and share how it connects to the practice of water diplomacy?
Well, first, I would like to thank the University of Calgary for organizing this meeting, and I'd like also to thank very much the Consulate General of Switzerland also for inviting me to join this very important event. I've been working for 33 years at the focal point of Switzerland in the UN Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes. And in addition to that, I've been heading the negotiations of 3 bilateral agreements with France.
Christian, do you want to comment on how your career intersects with diplomacy?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I join my colleague by thanking everyone that made it possible tonight. Water collaboration, water cooperation, hydropolitics, those are all the, let's say, research topics that have been really at the heart of my research agenda for the last 10 years. And in Geneva, we notably built since 2014 a research platform which is called the Geneva Water Hub, which is what we call an academic-based boundary organization that focus on science policy interface processes, supporting water diplomacy processes. So we try to combine our, let's say, academic hats, looking at fundamental and applied research, teaching to practitioners and students, with the facilitation of policy processes, which is a challenge by itself because you talk to people that are very different view worlds, basically. So it's how to accommodate that. That's a challenge. And then we also contribute to science diplomacy, in particular, working with different research institutions across the world to focus on water as a leverage of cooperation.
Dr. Black, maybe you could comment on your role in diplomacy, but also in community engagement?
Yes, perhaps I can say thank you for the warm introduction that Bill gave me earlier. So kind of you to say, Bill. And thank you obviously to our co-host here today, without which we would not have the cheese and chocolate that we have out here today. We do have a rule that anyone visiting from Switzerland must bring chocolate. And I was worried earlier today because Christian came empty-handed, but he assured me that there is chocolate in his backpack, so...
It's the first part of diplomacy.
That's exactly. First step. I've spent a good part of my life working in public and private sector and academic institutions, but tend to work in the space of disruption and behind the scenes and closed doors, sort of what we call a little bit of quiet disruption in the space. A little bit of a different way of calling track 2 diplomacy, the informal spaces where we bring people together to really influence policy. I'm trained as an engineer, but I definitely work in a non-traditional engineering practice, recognizing that technology is great, but not if no one cares, and not if there's policies, people to care about it and policies to support it. So that's where I come at it, is a very transdisciplinary notion of what engineering is, and what I think that translates into water diplomacy is that a lot of the solutions and pieces that we need to move forward tend to be held by a certain group of individuals. There's another group of individuals influencing policy, and then there's a bunch of people that really, at this stage, are not engaged in water discussions and don't even know that they should be. And so I think it's our job to bring all those people together to ensure that the people are aware of the changes that need to be made. And so that's kind of where I spend most of my time.
Great. So some general connections is how people plug into it. I'd like to now turn into getting into more of the meat, some of the meat of the issues. And Christian, I'd like to start with you. Given that nearly 60% of the world's fresh water crosses national borders, how can the governance frameworks that you study, particularly those aligned with the Blue Peace Initiative, help transform transboundary water competition into durable cooperation, especially in regions where political trust is limited? Just an easy problem for you to comment on.
Well, more or less, yeah, indeed. Well, first of all, in terms of dealing with water issue or with water scarcity, as we often say, water crisis is a governance crisis. So the institutional frameworks do play a major role in facilitating the processes and making sure that the boundary conditions are in place for cooperation to take place. And then it's indeed up to the parties to define the right way of acting. From what I see from my practice, there are a few principles that matter very much, I would say. First of all, data sharing. When you talk about water, sharing the data is a key dimension. Having a common understanding of what is the data, of how to calculate the data, and how to make sense out of it. That's certainly a key element. The other component is really maybe to focus less about the numbers, and I know it's a bit contentious to say that, and more about the processes. Because, I mean, when you talk about climate crisis, you need flexibility. So you need to be prepared on how to move forward, to adapt quite quickly. So it's really more about how to get together and how to find solutions together. And there are, like, coming back to the question you had about the frameworks I work with, I mean, you have many different frameworks that exist out there. And I'd like to maybe talk about one in particular, which is the case of the Organisation pour la mise en valeur du fleuve Sénégal, which is a shared basin commission shared between Mali, Senegal, Mauritania, and Guinea, which is very interesting because they had two types of mechanisms that are very innovative. On the one hand, they decided to go for co-property of all the infrastructures. So you have to imagine all the dams that are the co-property of all the countries. So when you talk about water as a common good, you go really into that direction. And then they have a mechanism to have a clear understanding about shared benefits and shared costs across the basin. So those are the two principles that allow the country to actually build trust on the long term. And what we saw in the region is that indeed, water was a driver for stability and cooperation since like already the 60s in the region. So this is why we should not, underestimate the power of water in driving cooperation processes.
You mentioned the data piece as you started out. So how do you actually validate the data in terms of, for example, transboundary water transport in countries that don't necessarily agree with one another? So coming back to this point that the transboundary piece is important, and it might have difficulty in engaging in terms of sharing in a cooperative way.
Well, that's one of the key issues, how to agree, and this is why it takes time. Because on the one hand, you have to find a common ground. You certainly need some facilitators also that are there to, explain you how to build together, how to have a common understanding. You need people that do that bridge, and you have, for instance, WMO, which is one of the main actors that have a lot of data set that also have methods on how to facilitate such a process, which are very important in building trust and cooperation. But this is certainly a process that takes time, and sometimes you don't necessarily have the infrastructures to collect all the data. So you also have to find solution, or sometimes you have data measurement stations that are, under the control of armed forces that are not part of governmental forces. So this is a proper challenge, but you need people that facilitate, I would say, and you need to acknowledge that it will be complex and it will take time.
So as an academic and a scholar that's leading this area, how do you inject yourself into these discussions with the different countries?
Inject myself. I like the idea. Well, there's many ways of doing it, and I think the universities are very well positioned actually to do that because we have the capacity to bridge different communities, different ontologies, and this is quite powerful in those type of contexts in particular. And then, for sure, we bring in the scientific perspective first, looking at what exists, what are the facts, how to measure the facts. But then I think we're also well positioned to bring the messages to the right people and to build a narrative that will allow cooperation to take place. So it's not only about the hardcore data, it's also about reading social political processes and about putting people together. And from our experience, it's having the universities involved as a broker in diplomacy processes is very impactful and very useful, I would say.
I think the world underestimates academic diplomacy and academic ambassadorship, especially when we're bringing the evidence-based solutions, or at least evidence that could influence the solutions in terms of cooperation. Sabine, maybe I could turn to you and ask you about Switzerland's Blue Peace Initiative, which has become the global reference for turning water-related tensions into opportunities for collaborations. And based on your diplomatic experience, what are the key lessons from Switzerland's cross-border multilateral engagement? Should Canada and its partners prioritize to strengthen joint leadership in global water diplomacy? Or, in our case, diplomacy among provinces in Canada, let's say? Sorry.
Yes, well, thank you for your question. Well, water diplomacy is a long game. It's very complex. It involves, I think water diplomacy, one should look at it as implementing sustainable development. And as it was said in the introduction, you have to bring all the topics together. And you have energy production, you have agriculture, you have also, for example, ecotourism. You have a lot of topics you have to balance together. So it's very challenging. I would say the experience from the Blue Peace, if you look at Blue Peace, this is a concept, but it is a toolbox. If you look at the toolbox, you have, for example, a part which is water literacy. And I've been with a lot of diplomats, and I have a lot of respect for diplomats. But in the latest years, I have to say, they don't know anything about water. I'm a biologist, actually, by the way. Actually, I've done the same studies as you, so I could relate. I found that it was very difficult sometimes to discuss. What we need also to have is also media training. I was on the bridge to my plane yesterday, and somebody says, what are you going to do in Calgary? And I said, I'm going to give a talk on transboundary waters. And he said, what? So I was a bit shocked. There is also the water diplomacy, as Christian said, where you provide the safe environment for the discussion. There is also the research, the data, which is so important, so that you provide actually help to get the proper data for those countries. But there's one thing which is, and nobody really talks, and I haven't heard it up to now, innovative financing. We have a saying in French, so if you've concluded your agreement, you think everything's fine. And well, actually, that's when the work starts. And the work, so you might look at, in a country, what are you going to do as a training? So you might say, well, you'll all think, water management. Actually, you need a training for finance as well. And you need to actually make it possible for that agreement to be implemented. And you need to have good train people for bankable project, for feasibility studies, to be able to make an investment plan. And this is where Blue Peace has been actually providing a lot of experience. And if I look at it, the Blue Peace has looked at how do we get there, and you need capacity building for financing. But then, how do you do that? Now, you are a river basin. You're not a country, you're a collection of countries. How are you going to get actually money? Are you going to go to the World Bank and say, I would like to have some money? Maybe that will work. But if you go to a private investor, they will think this is very risky. So I think one of the solutions that Blue Peace has actually brought in, which I think is very innovative as well, innovative financing, is to say we have to have blended finance. We need to have private and public finance together. And for the private investors, we need to de-risk their investment. They might not be very interested in financing water supply and sanitation, but they might actually look into energy production. But then you need the public finance to take maybe the initial losses of a project and to give a kind of guarantee. The public finance are not as heavily loaded with risks. They are in a government hand. And then on top of this, you can have philanthropy. So to blend finance give a certain security. And Switzerland has actually been working on that in the Senegal Basin and in the Gambian Basin for the same issue. So I think this is where I'd like to see maybe some joint forces with Canada and also with universities.
Thank you. Carrie, I want to turn to you. And when we look at water solutions, very often they fail because they overlook community context. And so from your perspective and your work, what does successful co-creation look like in practice? And how can it inform national and global policies, going from the local to the national to the global?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I might first just pick up on what Christian and Sibyl mentioned, which was Christian spoke about data and the need that there's a lot of data, but there's also, and this is particularly true in a Canadian context, a lack of data that's relevant. And a lack of data in small and rural and Indigenous communities across Canada, which makes it very difficult and tricky to engage in water diplomacy conversations when you don't have the right amount of information available. And the other piece is water literacy. And I think, globally, our reputation is changing slightly, but we are perceived as being very water-conscious people internationally. Here at home, I don't think you could say that. I think you could go to anybody and say, do you understand what transboundary water is? And no one's going to be able to necessarily understand that. They won't understand the nuance that exists just in our local setting in Alberta, much yet between us and British Columbia and Saskatchewan, what occurs in a really unique part of Canada where we have two provinces, the United States, First Nations, all engaging in really complex water conversations. So those two pieces are key to engaging in meaningful co-creation. But the biggest issue we have is that in order to engage in successful co-creation, people have to be engaged. And in a world of increasing disconnection from science and information, it's hard to ensure those meaningful co-creations. So the first thing I say is it takes time. And time is not anyone that is in economics wants to hear. It's not anything that people in policy want to hear, because our policy cycles are very, very short. You're lucky if they're 4 years, but they're often 2, depending on what's happening. And so to be able to influence those conversations and be part of the process and have all voices that must be there heard, you have to have a longer time period through which to engage in. And that makes it challenging, but it's also, I think, a great opportunity for how water diplomacy or science diplomacy can influence that process. It's on a longer time scale, and it forces you to listen to different people and different rights holders and stakeholders. So it takes more time. Usually that means it takes a bit more money, but we can move past that. But I think in a Canadian context, what I find really interesting is that there's a lot of things that I think people would say are different between Switzerland and the Canadian context, but there's a lot of commonality, tremendous amount of diversity in water usage and how that water is engaged with at an industry level and at an individual level. There's a lot of being taken for granted in terms of this sort of recognition that we have abundance and ergo we don't necessarily need to worry about it. But I will highlight in particular for those that might not be aware, I mean, we briefly mentioned, you got to hear the Alberta Water Act amendments that were debated today and have been. Majority of Albertans are not engaged in any of those conversations. At a Canadian scale, we're looking at the Canada Water Act. And as of 2025, November 26, we actually have no legally enforceable drinking water quality standards in First Nations across Canada. So there's a long way for us to go within this space, but that's where there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for co-creation and collaboration at the community level to be the model of how we actually move forward. You get more uptake, you save time in the long run, but it's really about ensuring that people are part of the solutions that you're hoping to impart at the highest levels. And so it's a top-down, bottom-up approach in co-creation where you hope that community comes to the same spot as leadership and policy, and you meet in the middle in order to really push something forward.
Carrie, could I ask you to dive in a little bit more in terms of, from your experience working with Indigenous communities, what key governance principles should shape international water diplomacy so that shared freshwater resources are managed transparently, equitably, and sustainably?
Yeah. An easy question, too, for sure. I think there's a lot happening at a national scale in this regard. What we're still seeing, though, is a domination of a seat at the table. An A seat at a table for Indigenous water governance is insufficient. It's unacceptable in most regards, because we have over 630 First Nations communities in Canada, Métis and Inuit communities, and non-status First Nations, and there is no formal legal mechanism for them to have a seat at the table for source water protection. And what that means is we are in this regulatory complexity. So water governed in, on, and under First Nations is federal jurisdiction. The water that is coming into that nation is provincial jurisdiction, and leaving is then provincial jurisdiction. And it is a really complex space to work within. The first piece is having legally enforceable mechanisms for Indigenous participation in water stewardship. And I say legally because we can all want to do better, but we don't always do better. And a legally enforceable mechanism is a way to do that. And there's certainly some things coming down the pipe, pardon the pun, to encourage that. But we're still a long way off from being able to have multiple seats at the table. And the other piece is a recognition of water stewardship and water personhood, and a recognition of water having a seat at a governance table. Internationally, we're seeing a lot of agreements being developed in that way and in that space where water has a physical seat at a table and it has a voice in conversations, and that can feel a little bit uncomfortable for those who are used to sort of the numbers and data and hard science, if you will, but it's been shown to be quite successful in being able to ensure that at any given moment you're giving voice to that which you are used to in a Canadian context, largely controlling and dominating. And so it changes the narrative because automatically your conversation is different. So though a seat at the table, but also multiple seats at the table, but a recognition that water also has a voice and control within this process.
How can institutions, universities, governments, and Indigenous communities work together to shift from reactive crisis management to proactive, long-term water diplomacy? Who wants to start that one?
Christian put down his paper.
No, I can start if you want.
Okay.
You want to go?
No, you go.
Sibyl?
Sibyl, go ahead.
Okay. I think I can't see the work of a government without actually having an involvement of universities, and actually Christian is the proof of that. They made a study on the governance of the Rhone, and thereafter Switzerland and France could actually work together. But there's also, Switzerland is much involved also on hydro diplomacy. We're also providing master's degrees or funding for master's degrees in Central Asia and in West Africa for that. And then the last report that came out today, a few days ago actually in Switzerland, which is called CH 2025, is actually the report on climate change, but it comes directly from universities and engineering schools. And we got back news. 3 degrees for the planet as an increase, but 4.9 degrees for Switzerland. So that means that now the government will have to build different strategies to adapt to climate change. But this is the base. Without universities, there's no way a government can actually work and have all the data and all the assessment that we need for informed decisions.
The Swiss Council's going to Edmonton tomorrow. We've got lots of messages to translate to Edmonton. Anyway, Christian?
Yeah, well, I believe that when you talk about water diplomacy, you do not talk only about conflict resolution. And building peace is a whole process that also is also about education. It's also about, communication, information across diverse stakeholders. So it also means that indeed you have to get different people around the table, as you said, and also to master the complexity which is linked to any water diplomacy or hydropolitical processes. And I think this is a challenge in itself, getting those people, different viewpoints around the table from different levels of analysis, also from government level towards very local communities. And again, I will repeat myself in some ways, but I think universities are really well positioned to do that job. And I think people that are able to broker actually and to make the connection between these different communities for indeed building a long-lasting peace, as you said, which is legitimate for all the different audiences that are involved in the process.
So let me turn that back on you a little bit. And the question is, do we have all the science we need to solve these problems? And the real solution is one of educating diplomats to understand the science. If research stopped tomorrow, do we have enough information about geomorphology? Then anyway, you know what I'm getting at.
Well, you know, with water, I think we have a lot in place actually. Also at the diplomatic level, we have an SDG 6 with really clear targets. We have the recognition of water as a human right. We have international conventions that are framing transboundary water management. But despite all of this, it's still very, very hard to put water forward on the political agenda. So I think it's not only a matter of research or political attention, but it's really about how we as a community were able to put water forward, and we should always keep water up on the agenda. And this is not the case for the moment. We still have billions of people on the planet that do not have an access to safe drinking water. Let's remind us that. I mean, that's a key element. And we have still billions of people that don't have access to proper sanitation systems. So we're way beyond the point where we should be, you know. So I think it's really a question of attention, of public attention to water, as you said, and then also to a political matter.
I guess the part of the question, and Carrie, I will get you to have a chance to answer this question, but it's this movement from proactive to the long term, right? We've been saying for a long time that in some jurisdictions in the world, they're using the amount of water they're using is not sustainable, and they're just actually draining their aquifers. And guess what? The land's subsiding, and guess what? They're not going to have enough water for the people that actually live there. We've known that for a long time, and yet it has to be when we actually can't pump more water out of the aquifer that all of a sudden people go, oh, wait a second, we've got a problem here. No, we've had a problem for a long, long time. So how do you actually get that shift between the proactive, it's affecting me today, right now, to wait a second, the science is telling us that we have a problem here, and the solutions are there. Christiane, do you want to comment on it, or I'll pass it over to
You
Carrie?
looked right at me just now. So yeah, give me the easy one. Well, I think science doesn't understand human behavior, which is a problem. And it's human behavior to be reactive, right? It's human behavior to not worry about your basement flooding until your basement floods. And that's just a reality of the way that our systems work within that. And so we haven't done a great job, because on a regular basis, I'm not sure that we're all saying the same thing. We're saying there's a crisis. We're not saying when it's going to be. We're disagreeing on it. We're disagreeing on levels of degrees, little tiny things that make the general population go, what are you trying to say to me, and why do I care if at the same time I can't put food on the table and I can't afford the energy into my house? So there's a reality here of that piece. And some of the solutions you want to come up with are not solutions that are equitable across the scale. So for example, starting at a low scale, and your kids want to draw a bath every day, and we have the luxury of drawing a huge bath at night if we wanted to for our kids every single night. That's not a reality in many parts of Canada, but it costs me nothing. And what are my kids learning in that space? They're learning I can turn on the tap, leave it on for the next hour, and no one cares. That's something that's ingrained at such a young level that by the time you get students at the university level where we're seeing them, it's, okay, but water's important, yeah, but like, whatever, because at that point, they've gone 18, 19, 20 years of not seeing that as a reality. So the reactive nature is a privileged position to be in, for one. And that makes it, again, even more challenging to unpack, because with that privilege comes a lack of wanting to do anything about it. And the number of people that want to change, the world and make it a better place outside of Canada, but then don't necessarily see what they can do in their own backyard is very interesting. I think starting knowledge mobilization isn't just about making your science sound better to policymakers. It's about making people care about what you call science and what you're doing. And that starts, for me, at the smallest, youngest age that we can, because that's a reality. And the other piece is that there's some harsh realities heading our way. We are going to have to pay more for water. We are going to have to use less. And it's either going to be done passively or voluntarily, or it's going to be done in a little bit more of an oppressive way. And no one wants to get to that stage. But again, that's where it's tough to not be reactive. So looking proactive, I think it's on us to communicate better, to make what we're doing more relevant, to stop bickering and disagreeing about how much how much water is going to be in my basement, but just let me know that there's going to be water in my basement. That's usually sufficient for the general public. They don't need the scientific back and forth. They just need you to tell them what's good and what's bad. And if we can work better together collaboratively as institutions, collaboratively in unsiloed ways, I think that's where you start to see movement and traction.
Sibylle, you touched on something that I want to get to before I get to the audience, and Christine touched on it as well, and that is, are we underestimating the amount of funding that's going to be required to put the infrastructure in place to deal with climate change with respect to water? I mean, I was once in a panel a long time ago in the US when I said that people won't actually accept climate change until they can't get an insurance for their condo in Manhattan.
Well, I've worked quite a bit on nature-based solutions, and we're still not getting there. And we're starting to discover that if you actually restore a wetland, you might actually be able to contain flooding. But you have to be very convincing. You have to tell people, and in some places, it's very difficult because you have to go on agricultural land. A farmer needs to actually accept he's going to be flooded. Even if you are going to pay his crop that is destroyed, even with young farmers in Switzerland, we've had some issues about that. So yes, the infrastructure has to be kept, maintained. And in many countries, people, they build the infrastructure, and then they think, well, we've done the job. And actually, this is again a financing issue. There's little education on that. You built an infrastructure, you built a dam, you need to maintain that dam. It's not a done job. So I think I'd like to say that on some of the issues, I wish there would be much more cross-pollination between the water people, the diplomats, but also the economists. Because I'm not an economist. For some of those matters, I don't understand everything. And I could not do an investment plan for a basin, for example. I'm not able to do that. But as a water person, I should have been able to do that. So I think education has to move in there. And there's another point on when we want to inform people about transboundary cooperation, we're not able to put up what are the benefits. And the benefits are not always in water. They're much beyond water. The Water Convention has been actually dealing with this, but it's not known by the public. It's known by the civil servants, to convince your government if you do transboundary cooperation. But we need to actually pass that message saying, well, if we work on this, well, this is going to be better for all of us. But the infrastructure is a big issue everywhere. And yes, the water price is going to increase. In Switzerland, we subsidized the wastewater treatment plants for quite a while, but now we all have to pay for their maintenance. Mm-hmm. And people are very surprised that you actually pay now for cleaning your water. And even my neighbors did not know, they didn't realize that any liter of water they use, they said, we have a lot of water. I said, yes, but then you warm up the water for your house. But then they all admitted they had actually not thought that 1 liter of water they use is going to be clean. That will use also energy, and that will have a cost. In Switzerland, people are mostly in rentals, so they don't really see those costs. And I was quite surprised as well. So people don't really understand water. So how do we promote water in the public is a big issue.
I mentioned Kim Sturgis in the audience, and Kim really brought that question of how much does water cost at the individual level in her work here at the province. Christiane, do you want to comment on the infrastructure piece? With like the governance as well?
Yes, for sure. Well, I think that indeed we totally underestimate the cost. I think we weigh too much, meaning that the cost of inaction will be much greater than investing directly into climate change adaptation policies. And I think we underestimate the fact that how big the change will be in terms of how we live, basically. If you look at urban planning, for instance, we have cities that have been built with consideration that did not integrate climate changes at all. We don't have this, those concepts of sponge cities, for instance, are concerned really a really small portion of the cities on the world. We have water pipes that are aging, that needs to be changed, that are leaking a lot. So there's a lot of potential, I think, but we totally understand the impact that this will have on the society.
So guess what, folks? It's over to the audience.
Thank you so much. What a fascinating conversation. The whole topic of hydropolitics sort of brought to mind a paper I read a long time ago at this university, where the contention was that if peace negotiations were treated like water negotiations, we would have more peace in the world. That was the thesis at that time. I was just thinking about that, and this leads to the question, what tools are missing that are present in water negotiations that could be useful in peace negotiations? This is way off track, but I thought I'd ask anyway.
The tools, Sibylle, you live this world.
Yes, exactly. The tool for peace negotiations, I think when we look at water, if I take the model of water agreement, you need to understand in which situation you are, where are actually the points where you disagree, where are the tensions, and what you need to deal with first. You need to have a real assessment, what comes first. I remember, and this is not about a conflict, but in a study, there was, I think it was Tajikistan, the people did not want to talk about water when some agencies went to see them. They said, we want to have the food brought into the main city. When that was done, then they could go into water. And so in some of you need to undo and assess really, like we've done, for example, with the study of Gouveron. You need, before you can actually understand where the conflicts, where the things are, I think you need to have a really big assessment of the situation. It always comes from the technical. You don't go top down with something, always. I think it's the best way to build.
Christian?
Yeah, maybe beyond the tools, I think it's rather important to think about how powerful water is in driving cooperation processes. If you look at the media outlet, you will often see the narrative of the water wars coming up. But actually, if you see, like in practice, and research showed that water historically is a driver of cooperation. This is numbers that are provided by UNECE. I mean, since '48, we have about 37 conflicts directly linked to water, and for the same period, we have more than 300 agreements that have been signed. And this is something that we quite often forget, actually, about how powerful water is in driving cooperation processes. So I think just taking that in mind could be helpful for other sectors as well. And including water as a topic of peace building should be really valued in international relations, I guess.
Gary, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just picking up on the number of agreements related to water, but the opposite of that is true, that most of the conflicts have existed around water at the same time. And so both of those things are true at the same time. What's nice about water negotiations is the diversity of players that are in those conversations that you don't often see in peace talks and peace negotiations, which tend to be at very political levels and don't include, at the water scale, we're looking at having all of the different players, technical sciences, policymakers, everyone with a slightly different piece of the pie, come to the table, which is not something that you see reflected often in peace talks. You won't have, and it's important because in water we have energy and agriculture and all different uses and players involved, and the same could be extracted to peace talks because it's in those same spaces that you have all those competing interests. I think that's one of the really novel ways that water has been kind of unique in achieving a lot of those agreements, is bringing diverse viewpoints together, but all around that same topic in a way that maybe peace talks haven't been able to do up till now.
I think just speak into it, Judith.
There you go.
Well, welcome to our guest from Switzerland, and it's wonderful to see your leadership in the Blue Peace initiatives that you've been making. I've got a question that I'm just wondering, perhaps it's the elephant in the room, but what involvement or not and influence has the United States in view of the new administration and their position on climate change and resources? Be most interested in your comments on that.
Should I take it?
It's a good one for you.
Well, that's indeed the big elephant in the room, I would say. It's definitely an issue, not only for water. It's about multilateralism. It's about international cooperation, broadly speaking. We see a setback in environmental governance, broadly speaking, talking for water, talking for climate changes. So it's a global issue, I would say. But in my view, this calls for even more cooperation between like-minded countries. And typically going back to what we see now on the table, Switzerland and Canada are, for instance, two countries that value multilateralism, that value human rights, that value sustainability. And we need some more networked multilateralism of countries that are able to push those agenda forward, because we can't forget those agenda. But indeed, we see the slowing down globally, which means that those countries, in my opinion, should step up even more nowadays.
There has been historically, tremendous cooperation between Canada and the U.S., throughout the Great Lakes, and it also when faced with crisis, how, the countries have come together to deal with it. Invasive species, for example, is one. I think that people in North America are going to be reminded very, very soon about how closely linked water cycles are at the continental level and not at the kilometer squared level. I think that reality is going to be coming home very, 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 very soon.
Yeah, thank you, Ed, and thanks, everyone. I have a question on the shift from thinking about and engaging with water as an object of study or an object of science or diplomacy and everything else, to what you described as a subject or a personhood. Mm-hmm. And what's the impact, or what responsibility do universities have to prepare people to be able to join water at the table as a subject in common rather than as an object, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a slow and subtle reframing of our educational approach to these topics. It's starting, in some ways I think it's starting quite well at younger levels, and it's starting to evolve more. It's a decolonization of our curriculum, which is sometimes a word that people don't fully understand, but it's the decolonization piece is removing a Western-centric notion of how we understand water. And the Western-centric notion is that I have a control and I have the will with respect to water. It doesn't recognize that water has a will. Water will choose to appear and not appear at its own discretion. And so it doesn't recognize the role that water's will has. And so in the decolonization of curriculum, it's taking people an extra step, whether it's starting slow and it's module by module, or it's a whole course that we're seeing across many Canadian institutions in particular, is the inclusion of Indigenous ways of knowing and doing around water and understanding historically relationships with water. And the biggest part of that is that in the Canadian context, and it's a little bit different than in the European context, where we have chosen quite often to live in the worst places that you could choose to live in. And historically, for 10,000s of years, Indigenous peoples would never have moved a lake in order to live there, which is the case of, say, the Lower Mainland in Vancouver. As you pass through Chilliwack and Abbotsford, that is a lake. And when the dam breaks, it becomes a lake once again, because that's water's will. And in those conversations, it's a reframing of what assumptions am I making in this process about water and what water wants to do and doesn't want to do. And it's really hard. Don't get me wrong, that is a very hard conversation for technical scientists and engineers to engage in. And so you have to start subtle. But part of that is engaging in conversations around what bias did I bring to this conversation today? So the first bias I might bring to a water resources class is that I believe that I can control water. So unpacking the fact that you think that you can, but that's short-term and short-lived. And so how would I do things differently if I believed that I was working in reciprocity with water, for example, or that water was the one not necessarily serving you, but where you were serving water? What if you flipped that power dynamic? And it's not something that's well taught in the engineering sciences, because our profession is built on control and manipulation of things. But it is something that you're starting to see slowly built back into the way that we're teaching people to understand our world, and it's a reframing of how we've come to understand our world that is very uncomfortable at the early stages, but that initial decolonization and then the piece that comes after that is including Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, because the reality is in a very short time, Western ways have really done an atrocious job at living in harmony with nature, and that's only 2,000 years, depending on, you can count it to 3 if you want, but tens of thousands of years of living in harmony with nature. And so those pieces are critical to get into the minds of technical scientists and engineers and students in arts and geography in every single space, public policy and law. law in particular. We're seeing huge changes of lawmakers who are talking about personhood of water in ways that you would not have seen 5 years ago. All of those pieces at the institutional level, if we can get more and more students engaged in understanding the world in new and innovative ways that are actually not that new and innovative, they've always been there, we just haven't listened, that's where I think you're going to start to see change makers who are looking at the world through different lenses. And that's absolutely essential for some of the policies that are going to need to be made moving forward.
Hi.
Oh, yes.
Well, sorry, I would make a radical proposal. Can we live without water? No. The SDG 6, and we're still in that Agenda 2030 implementation. Actually, every student in universities should actually see how their study field can provide the implementation of all the targets of SDG 6. Just have them to think, how can they do that? I had that discussion with foresters, and they said, what's in for our forests in the SDGs? And I said, no. You go on looking at yourself. What can forest do, or the forest management do, to implement all the other SDGs? And I think this is very important that everyone reflects how, through our topics, can we implement all the whole SDG. And we don't have much time, like 4 more years.
Okay, just want to make sure it's on. Okay. I kind of want to shift towards more of the bottom-up thing that you were talking about, and how not enough, ordinary everyday people know about transboundary water. I just want to know, what are 1 or 2 things that I can do as a student and as a citizen and for the people around me, because I see a lot of apathy as well towards these type of things. What are 1 or 2 things that I can do that are realistic as well to get these people involved in knowing, because it takes a strong foundation?
That's awesome. Well, you're here for starters, so that's fantastic. The one thing that I tell students, well, the 2 things I tell students is to get involved in their local water stewardship groups, the basin councils, listen in, volunteer, citizen science are great ways. The easiest one that I tell students, because you're usually inundated with homework and exams and due dates, is take a minute, and every day I tell students in our environmental engineering class, I want you to spend the next week timing how much water you use. Carry around, it sounds ridiculous, it really does, but the average student will say, and I ask this at the beginning of the semester and usually at the end, if I remember. I don't ask for any other details other than this, I should clarify, which is how long do you take a shower? That's it, there's nothing inappropriate there. But how long do you take a shower? And they'll usually say, the average guess is 10 minutes. Every time it's 10 to 12 minutes. And every time by the end of the semester, if I ask them how long did you actually take a shower for, we're over 20. Is the average. And that's a really glaring piece for you to recognize. And it's actually the act of just timing yourself reduces your water use. And so be part of that change. So engage in your water stewardship councils. We have representatives here tonight from a lot of those councils. Chat with them. They will tell you, these are places that are not well funded. They need volunteers. They want people who are active. And so engage in that. Engage in reading up. There's thousands of books in a Canadian context on our water history and our water policies. No one's reading them necessarily. There's some on my bookshelf in case you'd like to read them. But that's part of it, is educating yourself, challenging what you're learning within a space. So the media literacy is key as piece. Not everything that you're reading these days, and especially for students where they're not reading from, I don't know what they're reading from. I ask that question every year too, and I get some really interesting answers. You're not reading any news anymore. Read the news. Read it locally, read it nationally, read it globally. You will see right away the amount of water concerns that are there, and there's always opportunities there to insert yourself in those conversations, but you will find that as soon as you start inserting yourself into those spaces, man, are we a friendly group that want more and more people to care about water. And that's just at a local scale, but I'm sure Christian and Sibyl have seen the role that youth and students and the younger generation can play in really driving change.
Yeah, I was about to say, actually, we also need the youth to be active at the political level. We need youth to be there when the white male in their 60s discuss in a room. You know, I was in New York at the last UN conference in 2023. That was, by the way, the second UN water conference after 74. So it shows you the positioning of water, the political agenda. And honestly, those conferences are boring as hell. Okay, nothing is happening, basically. Like, countries come up with prepared declaration, and that's it. And the most lively session I saw were the ones driven by youth and native communities, because they had something to say. And you have a lot of actually of youth movement and networks that exist where you can position yourself and also advocate for your own country to act differently at the global level. You know, you have the Youth World Water Parliament, for instance. You have the International Youth Network. You have the Secretariat for Water, which is based in Montreal, I believe. So you have those platforms that exist where youth can really get engaged in advocating for water. And we need water advocates that talk about water in a different ways than it is done usually.
Just to prove that we're a technologically literate audience, I'm going to turn to the QR code questions.
We have a lot of very interesting questions. I'll read the one concerning with misinformation. How do we continue to advocate for water policies as misinformation becomes more prevalent and decision makers choose to ignore relevant research?
I think if I look at the website we didn't inform so proactively on water. And I think we should provide forward much more information, or it's usually the websites are looked by specialists. And we don't really tell them where they could find information on what we are doing. We don't inform. We had sometimes in our magazine for our ministry very little for the international conferences, right? We had very little room to actually say things, and maybe a number out of 3 years would come out on water, but that's really not enough. So governments have a responsibility also to inform and attract attention on the proper data, what's out there. So have provinces or municipalities to say, this is the water you have. In Lausanne, where I live, they provide you the quality of the water. They tell you several things. It's still not enough for me, but maybe for the other citizens, it's fine. I mean, they get some regular information, but we could do much more and actually say, did you know there were actually, like you said, very little wars for water. It's actually something else. Some little spots of information that would be really interesting, that would attract the attention.
Maybe I'll just add that, and I've seen this more recently, but that misinformation, I think it's easy for us to say that it exists in these obscure places, and the average person is smart enough to tell the difference between each of those things. Well, we're not anymore with AI. None of us can tell the difference anymore. But misinformation thrives in disconnection. And so the more that we become disconnected from one another and with place, and then that's in particularly, in Canadian context, despite the beautifulness of our surroundings, we are very disconnected from our natural landscapes. The more that we can reconnect with nature, the more we can reconnect with each other, is where that misinformation starts to go away. And I think that's the piece that people don't necessarily want to acknowledge. It's easy to blame the people that are generating misinformation, but it's harder for us to look inwardly and recognize that our lack of wanting to connect with one another is thriving misinformation, because it's also fueling a notion of bias and a notion of assumption. So I'm going to make an assumption about an Albertan living in southern Calgary that might be different about the assumption I make about an Albertan living in northern Alberta or someone living in Ontario. And that misinformation is gotten worse in that moment because I've made assumptions about people. And those assumptions thrive when I don't make those connections. So if we can move away from blaming the misinformation and focus more on reconnection, it's that positive way of reframing. Because oftentimes when we're, at an event where you're immersed in actually within the river or within the watershed, and people engage with you in those conversations, and they might in those conversations say, I heard this, and you're like, that's really interesting, let's talk about it. Instead of blaming each other for not understanding a concept the same way, let's try and figure out why we think of these things in a little bit of a different way and find that commonality. And at that point, we may still disagree on the solution, but if we could agree on the problem, that might be a pretty fantastic place to achieve some level of reconciliation. So for me, it's less on generation of misinformation and more about fostering reconnection between people and place.
How do you manage water diplomacy when countries that share waters are in conflict?
It's another easy one for you, Christian.
Well, the whole purpose of water diplomacy is actually to avoid conflict. So you try to work before it happens in defining boundary conditions for people to talk and to have an exchange before it gets towards too heavy tensions, I would say. But once they're in conflict, usually what happens, and this is quite surprising, is that water remains usually one of the last channels for actually communication among the involved countries. And we saw that in several instances. This being said, we see nowadays a varying tendencies in terms of water in conflict, because if water has long been protected, notably through the Geneva Convention, what we see in the last few years is actually direct attacks on water-related infrastructures. We saw that notably in Iraq with the time where ISIS had some territory and used some dams as a leverage, as a weaponization of water. We saw that in Ukraine, dams that have been directly targeted. We saw that in Gaza, a desalination plant that have been targeted. We saw critical infrastructure generating power for the water system that have been targeted directly. So this is a very worrying tendency that we witness, unfortunately, nowadays. But the whole purpose of water diplomacy is to avoid that actually to happen in the first place. So this is why I was saying earlier that water diplomacy is not only about conflict resolution. It's about peace building in the large sense, about how to prepare people to work together in the long run and not to solve only the conflict when it happens.
Sibylle, do you want to add anything on that?
Well, actually, one of the very important convention, the Convention on the Protection of the Rhine, actually happened right after the war. And the same in Southern Eastern Europe. The Drin Basin was also where people came together. And in some other places, when the top governments don't agree, usually the municipalities on each side of the river, they still have to provide water to their citizens. So actually, you have agreements at a different level. Well, the governments don't get on, okay, well, but we are actually looking at each other across a river and we're going to work together. So there is always a power of, as you said, of water to join people, because you still need to drink, you still need to wash. So the basic human needs to be covered, and that everyone can relate to that. So I think that's the very important point, is that it's not a lost game. You can build on it. But for Europe, the Convention on the Protection of the Rhine was a very important convention for that matter.
So I'm going to ask Buffy to stand and give her closing comments, but as she's doing that, could you please join me in thanking the panel tonight? And I'm sure there are going to be lots of engaged discussions during the reception afterwards, so thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much to the panelists for keeping us engaged on our toes right until the end. I think this is a kind of conversation that we can be talking for a few more hours. I feel like we've kind of run out of time and we're just covering the surface. So thank you. And thank you so much, President McCauley, for facilitating this great discussion. I also want to thank Dr. Galli. Merci beaucoup d'être notre maître de cérémonie pour ce soir. And thank you all guests for an evening that has truly reflected the spirit of collaboration and curiosity that defines both Switzerland and Canada. Tonight's discussion has reminded us that water diplomacy is not only about managing resources, but about nurturing relationships. It's about transforming shared challenges into shared purpose. It's about letting science and policy flow together across borders and disciplines to create equity and sustainability. The University of Calgary is deeply honored to have partnered once again with the Consulate General of Switzerland in Vancouver to host this event. Our institutions are connected by a common vision that research, dialogue, and innovations are powerful tools for global engagement and meaningful progress. I would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation to Mr. Thomas Schneider, the Consul General of Switzerland, and Ms. Tamara, a Science and Technology Attaché, for your continued partnership and for bringing the Blue Peace Dialogue to our campus. Thank you, Sybil and Christian, for flying in from Switzerland to share your expertise and insights. I also want to take a special moment to recognize the contribution of Dr. Carrie Black and then Dr. Martin Clark, whose vision and expertise helped shape the event, and whose research at the UN Water Hub continues to advance Canada's leadership in water governance, resilience, and sustainability. And we're very, very lucky to have them on our campus. Thank you. As we look ahead, our commitment is clear: to strengthen our research, academic, and industry partnerships with Switzerland and other global allies, to empower the next generation of scholars and innovators, and it was so great to see so many students participating in tonight's event, and to ensure that the University of Calgary continues to serve as a bridge between science and diplomacy, between research and policy, and between nations that share a vision for a more peaceful, sustainable world by safeguarding water resources for future generations. Thank you all for being here, for contributing your insights and your energy, and for joining us in advancing this vital dialogue on water and peace. I now invite the Consul General to return to the podium to deliver his closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Buffy. And I'm sorry I'm standing between you and the food, but bear with me for one more minute. So I would like to come back to what Sybil said about diplomats. And you're right, a diplomat is a person who knows something about everything and nothing about anything. And that's absolutely true. That's why we need you as experts. And dear Dr. McCauley, dear panelists, thank you very much for this insightful discussion this evening. It is clear that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for complex transboundary water challenges. What is absolutely necessary in every case is a commitment to better cooperation. This is where the Blue Peace concept, which is intentionally adaptable, comes into play. Our approach rests on three essential pillars, I believe. It's water diplomacy, concrete action, and infrastructure projects on the ground, and water literacy, education, and youth engagement. The third pillar is crucial. It is about strengthening youth participation, bringing future champions from all countries together, ensuring that they are prepared to tackle the water issues of tomorrow. I'm personally very excited that so many students and young professionals joined our events today. And you represent the future of this cooperation. I would like to offer a special thank you to all the student volunteers for their tremendous support in organizing this successful event. I'm naming Simka, Tanisha, Colleen, Rui, Melanie, Semi, Sydney, Fawaz, Kaper, Maria, Julia, Cecilia, Shaden, and Kieran. I would like to thank also my colleague Tamara, who pulled off this together with the University of Calgary. Great job, thank you so much, and congratulations. I would also like to extend a heartfelt thanks to the University of Calgary, the international teams, specifically Buffy Saint-Amand, Faye Salins, Debbie McKnight, Melanie Yarkhan, Sher Hussein, Jana Duman, Nicole Pulcinelli, Lisa Lindsay, Carolina Franco Suarez, Hannah Curtis, Nicole Stubley, Nishan Sharma, and Ellie Park. The University of Calgary not only welcomed us to this campus, but is also hosting the joint exhibition featuring the Swiss Blue Peace Initiative and the Canadian Water Research and Innovation that originated right here. So the exhibition you can find in the back. I strongly encourage you to explore the exhibition in the next 2 weeks. Our event tonight has been a profound testament to the long-term relationship and close cooperation that binds Canada and Switzerland. Our two nations are united by shared values, a commitment to democracy, multilateralism, and a common vision for sustainable and a secure world. Our enduring partnership spans trade, innovation, culture, and peace building. And as we celebrate 8 years of bilateral relation this year in 2025, this event is definitely a wonderful way of celebrating this anniversary. In this spirit of collaboration that we embody tonight, as we address one of the most pressing global challenges of our time, I encourage everyone here to take the insight gained, challenge conventional thinking, and seek innovative, collaborative solutions in your own professional and academic spheres. Once again, my sincere thanks to the University of Calgary for your partnership, and to all of you for dedicating your time and energy to this dialogue. Let us leave here committed to working together to make the vision of Blue Peace a global reality. Thank you for joining us, and now I would like to invite you to enjoy our reception.